Have you ever wondered what secrets your closest friends might be keeping from you? What dark agreements might be made in whispered conversations when you leave the room? The case I'm about to share with you remained hidden for over a century, buried beneath layers of respectability, wealth, and the passage of time, until a chance discovery exposed one of the most disturbing conspiracies in Georgia's history. Before we begin this journey into the darkest corners of human greed, take a moment to comment where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel continue to uncover these hidden historical horrors that mainstream media refuses to acknowledge. Subscribe now. If you haven't already, we need your help to keep bringing these forgotten stories to light. The small town of Elmwood, Georgia, had always taken pride in Oakwood Manor, the sprawling plantation estate that dominated the eastern edge of the county. Built in 1872 by cotton magnate Jeremiah Blackwood, the mansion stood as a testament to the wealth that had once flowed through the region, even decades after the Civil War had reshaped the South's economic landscape. By 1919, the property had passed to Jeremiah's son, Harrison Blackwood, a reclusive bachelor who had expanded the family business into timber and early manufacturing. Harrison was known in town as a difficult employer, but a generous benefactor, funding the local school, hospital wing, and church renovations. He was often described as particular in his ways, requiring strict adherence to schedules, immaculate housekeeping, and absolute loyalty from his staff. While most employees came and went quickly, unable to tolerate his exacting standards, 3 women had remained in his service for over a decade: Eleanor Pruitt, his housekeeper; Vivian Marshall, his cook; and Catherine Winters, his personal secretary. These 3 women, all in their early 30s and unmarried, formed the core of Harrison's household. They were respected in town for their ability to manage their demanding employer and admired for the comfortable positions they had secured in an era when women's professional opportunities remained limited. They were known to be inseparable friends, often seen together on their rare days off, shopping or taking tea at the local hotel. On May 12, 1919, Harrison Blackwood reportedly left Elmwood for an extended business trip to Atlanta and then New York. The information came via a telegram delivered by Miss Winters to Harrison's lawyer Milton Hargrove. The message explained that Harrison had departed suddenly after receiving word of a promising business opportunity and had asked his secretary to inform Hargrove that he was transferring management of local affairs to his 3 trusted employees until his return. Mr. Hargrove was somewhat surprised by the arrangement, noted Sheriff Thomas Wilson in his report from the time. But he acknowledged that Mr. Blackwood had previously expressed complete confidence in these 3 women, and the authorization document appeared to bear his signature. With business matters pressing, he accepted the unusual situation. What followed was even more unusual. 2 weeks after Harrison's departure, a second telegram arrived, this one supposedly from New York. In it, Harrison announced his intention to remain in the North indefinitely to pursue expanding business interests. More shocking to the town was his declaration that he was transferring ownership of Oakwood Manor to his 3 loyal employees in recognition of their years of dedicated service and as compensation for managing his remaining southern interests. People were stunned, recounted Margaret Collins, whose grandmother had been the town's telephone operator at the time. Harrison Blackwood giving away his family home. To his staff, it seemed incomprehensible. He'd always spoken of passing it to his nephew in Virginia, but Mr. Hargrove confirmed the transfer documents had arrived by courier, with Harrison's signature witnessed by a New York attorney. Legally, everything appeared in order. Eleanor, Vivian, and Catherine moved from their staff quarters into the main house, transitioning seemingly overnight from employees to property owners. They continued to run the Blackwood businesses with unexpected acumen, making smart investments and expanding operations. Within a year, they had become three of the wealthiest women in the county, hosting elaborate parties at the mansion and establishing themselves as prominent society figures. They complemented each other perfectly, observed local historian Dr. James Mercer. Eleanor was methodical and detail-oriented, handling the property management. Vivian was charismatic and persuasive, managing business relationships. Catherine was analytical and forward-thinking, directing investments. Together, they proved more successful than Harrison had been, particularly as they modernized operations for the new decade. Letters occasionally arrived from Harrison, always sent from different northern cities, expressing satisfaction with their management and his new life away from Georgia. After 5 years, a final communication announced his decision to settle permanently in Boston with a widow he had met there. He requested they send no further business correspondence, as he was fully retiring and leaving everything in their capable hands. And so life continued in Elmwood. The three friends lived together at Oakwood Manor for decades, never marrying, growing old together in the mansion they had once cleaned and maintained. They became known for their philanthropy, establishing scholarships and funding civic improvements. When they died, Catherine in 1962, Eleanor in 1964, and Vivian in 1968, they left most of their considerable estate to local charities, with the mansion designated to become a museum celebrating local history. They were viewed as eccentric but respected pillars of the community, Dr. Mercer explained. Three spinsters who had been extraordinarily fortunate and who had used that good fortune to benefit their town. Their unusual living arrangement raised occasional eyebrows, but their generosity and business success insulated them from serious gossip. The story might have ended there, preserved in local lore as an unusual tale of loyalty rewarded, if not for the extensive renovation work undertaken at Oakwood Manor in March 2023. The County Historical Society had received a significant grant to restore the aging mansion, focusing particularly on structural issues in the East Wing, where water damage had compromised the foundation. We expected to find rot, maybe some artifacts that had slipped between floorboards over the decades, explained Diane Patterson, director of the Historical Society. What we didn't expect to find was a body. The remains were discovered within a sealed cavity in the wall of what had once been Harrison Blackwood's study, a space that had been converted to a linen storage area during the women's occupancy. The cavity had been professionally constructed, with double layers of brick and concrete, creating a space just large enough to conceal a human body. The remains were remarkably well preserved due to the unusual conditions within the wall cavity, noted forensic anthropologist Dr. Robert Chen. The space had been treated with lime and other chemicals that retarded decomposition, while the sealed nature of the chamber prevented insect or animal activity. The body had essentially mummified, allowing us to determine with relative certainty that this was Harrison Blackwood, and that he had died of unnatural causes. The evidence was unmistakable. Harrison had not left for a business trip in 1919. He had been murdered, a crushing blow to the skull, and concealed within the walls of his own home. Further investigation revealed more disturbing details. In the metal box, buried beneath the rose garden, investigators found Harrison's signet ring, personal papers, and a journal belonging to Eleanor Pruitt. The journal, spanning from 1917 to 1921, revealed the truth behind the three women's sudden change in fortune. Its pages documented years of abuse suffered by the three friends at Harrison's hands, verbal cruelty, exploitation, and increasingly inappropriate behavior. It detailed their gradual realization that despite their years of service, they remained completely vulnerable to his whims, with no security or future prospects beyond continued servitude. What emerged was a picture of calculated desperation, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Sarah Mitchell. These weren't impulsive criminals, but women who had come to believe they had no other options. Eleanor's journal describes how Harrison had begun threatening to replace them with younger staff, how he had withheld their wages over minor infractions, how he had begun making unwanted advances toward Catherine. The breaking point came when Harrison announced his intention to sell Oakwood Manor and relocate to Atlanta, planning to dismiss all current staff rather than bring them along. For the three women, this represented not just the loss of employment, but of their home, community, and the only security they had known in adulthood. "We have decided we cannot allow him to destroy us," Eleanor wrote on April 30th, 1919. "After all we have endured, after all we have contributed to building his fortune, we deserve more than to be discarded. V says there is a way out if we have the courage. C has the business knowledge to make it work. I have the steadiness to see it through. Together, we might claim the life that should have been ours all along." The plan had been meticulously crafted over several months. They had studied Harrison's signature, practiced his writing style, and researched the legal processes necessary for property transfer. They had cultivated relationships with his business associates, learning the operations from the inside. They had even prepared the concealment space in advance. Creating it during a renovation project they had convinced Harrison was necessary to address water damage, ironically similar to the project that would expose their crime a century later. On the night of May 11th, 1919, they had served Harrison his favorite meal, accompanied by wine laced with a sedative from the household medical supplies. Once he was incapacitated, Vivian, the physically strongest of the three, had struck the fatal blow with a fireplace poker. They had then carefully placed his body in the prepared wall cavity, sealed it, and spent the night cleaning any evidence of the crime. "The level of premeditation is chilling," noted Sheriff Rebecca Davis, who oversaw the modern investigation. "These weren't women who snapped in a moment of passion. They planned this murder over months, considering every detail, preparing for a complete takeover of his life and property. And they managed to keep their secret for over a century." The journal revealed that the trio had established their alibi by ensuring Harrison was seen leaving for the train station in his automobile early on May 12th. Catherine, who was approximately Harrison's height and build, had dressed in his clothing, wearing a hat pulled low and his distinctive overcoat. She had driven his car toward the station as arranged, but instead had circled back to the estate via a rarely used service road, hiding the vehicle in a remote barn on the property where it was later dismantled and disposed of piecemeal. They created the impression of Harrison's continued existence through carefully managed correspondence, explained forensic document examiner Dr. William Foster. They had practiced his handwriting extensively. The few telegrams and letters from Harrison were actually written by Catherine, who had the most similar handwriting style. They were sent by associates of the women in the various cities Harrison was supposedly visiting. These associates, the journal revealed, were primarily women in similar circumstances, housekeepers, secretaries, and companions who had formed a loose network of mutual support across the South and into northern cities. This network had proved crucial to maintaining the illusion of Harrison's continued existence, providing out-of-town addresses from which to send correspondence and occasionally delivering packages that appeared to come from the absent employer. What we're seeing is not just a murder conspiracy, but an early form of a support network among women with limited options in that era, observed historian Dr. Elizabeth Morgan. These women created a system of mutual aid that operated beneath the awareness of the men who employed them. The journal mentions regular correspondence with at least 15 other women in similar positions across 7 states. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they discovered evidence that the conspiracy extended beyond the murder and assumption of Harrison's property. The 3 women had systematically eliminated every trace of their previous identities, removing personal documents from local records and establishing new backgrounds for themselves. It appears they were not actually childhood friends, as they later claimed, Sheriff Davis explained. According to Eleanor's journal, they had each come to work for Harrison from different circumstances. Eleanor had been widowed during the Spanish flu epidemic and left destitute. Vivian had fled an abusive marriage in Alabama. Catherine had been forced to abandon her education due to family financial troubles. They had created a narrative of lifelong friendship to explain their unusual living arrangement and close bond. This reinvention extended to their public personas after taking over the estate. They carefully constructed images as cultured, educated women from respectable backgrounds, taking advantage of the social mobility that their newfound wealth afforded. They donated to the right causes, joined the appropriate committees, and gradually established themselves as fixtures of local society, their former status as servants forgotten as the years passed. They understood that wealth could rewrite their histories, noted Dr. Morgan. In post-World War I America, particularly in the South, where old social structures were evolving, money could create respectability. By the 1930s, few people in Elmwood remembered or mentioned that these prominent women had once been household staff. The journal also revealed the psychological toll of their crime. Eleanor documented recurring nightmares, moments of panic when official mail arrived, and the constant fear of discovery during the early years. She described elaborate precautions the women took, from avoiding photographers to restricting visitors to certain parts of the house. Most poignantly, she recorded their pact never to separate, bound together not just by friendship, but by their shared knowledge of what lay hidden in the walls of Oakwood Manor. "We are married to this house and to each other now," she wrote in 1925. "Our freedom was purchased at a terrible price, and we must remain together to bear that cost. Sometimes at night I imagine I hear him scratching inside the wall, seeking escape. C says it is just mice, but V admits she hears it too. Perhaps it is just the sound of our consciences, which will never be truly silent." As the investigation progressed, authorities faced an unprecedented situation. The crime had occurred over a century earlier. The perpetrators were long dead, as were any contemporaries who might have provided additional evidence. The statute of limitations for any associated financial crimes had expired decades ago. What remained was a historical murder case with no one left to prosecute. This became less a criminal investigation and more an archaeological and historical research project, explained Sheriff Davis. "Our focus shifted to documenting what actually happened, restoring the historical record, and determining the appropriate way to handle Harrison Blackwood's remains." The discovery prompted difficult questions for the Elmwood Historical Society and the broader community. The museum at Oakwood Manor had celebrated the three women as pioneering female entrepreneurs and philanthropists. Exhibits highlighted their business acumen, community contributions, and the scholarships that still bore their names at local schools. How should the institution now address the fact that their wealth and status had been built upon murder? "We're not erasing them from our history, but we are recontextualizing their story," explained Diane Patterson. The museum now includes a comprehensive exhibit about Harrison's murder and the social conditions that led to it. "We don't excuse what they did, but we do provide the full historical context, the limited options for women in that era, the power imbalances in domestic service, and the desperation that drove their actions." The investigation also led to a re-evaluation of Harrison Blackwood himself. Business records and personal correspondence revealed a man whose public generosity masked private cruelty. Former employees were identified through census and employment records, and their descendants shared family stories about Harrison's exploitative practices, volatile temper, and inappropriate behavior toward female staff. He was known to dismiss servants without references for minor infractions, effectively preventing them from finding new positions in the area, Dr. Mercer noted. He routinely withheld wages as penalties for perceived failures in service. And there were consistent rumors about his behavior toward younger female employees, though such matters were rarely documented in that era. None of this excused murder, investigators and historians agreed, but it painted a more complex picture of the case than initial headlines suggested. The three friends had committed a premeditated killing and engaged in years of fraud, but they had done so in a context where they had few legal protections or opportunities for justice. This case exists at the intersection of true crime and social history, observed Dr. Morgan. It reveals as much about the constraints on women's lives in the early 20th century as it does about the specific crime itself. These women found themselves with an impossible choice between continued exploitation and a criminal conspiracy. They chose a path that was morally wrong but born of systemic injustice. As news of the discovery spread beyond Elmwood, descendants of the three women were identified and contacted. Most expressed shock and dismay, having grown up with family stories that portrayed their great-aunts or distant cousins as successful businesswomen who had been fortunate enough to inherit from a generous employer. Martha Winters, Catherine's grandniece, shared her family's reaction. It's devastating to learn that people you've admired were capable of such an act. Our family had a portrait of Aunt Catherine in the living room my entire childhood. She was held up as an example of what women could achieve through hard work and intelligence. Now we're trying to reconcile that image with this terrible truth. The case took another turn when investigators discovered a hidden compartment in what had been Vivian's bedroom, revealing a collection of letters exchanged between the three women during rare periods when they were separated. These letters, spanning from 1922 to 1960, provided insight into their evolving feelings about their crime and the life they had built upon it. In their private correspondence, they never explicitly mentioned the murder, referring to it only as our arrangement or the necessity, but they frequently discussed their charitable work as a form of atonement and their commitment to using their position to help others with limited options. In one particularly revealing letter from 1931, during the depths of the Great Depression, Catherine wrote to Eleanor, who was visiting relatives in Virginia, "We have approved every application for assistance from the mill workers this month, despite our objections about depleting capital." The letters reveal a complex mixture of guilt, justification, and genuine devotion to each other and to the community they'd adopted, explained Dr. Mitchell. I reminded him that we, of all people, understand what desperate circumstances might drive good people to do. Our arrangement has given us the power to prevent others from facing such terrible choices, and we must use it accordingly. This is the purpose that justifies our past. The letters also revealed the psychological mechanisms that had allowed the women to live with their crime over decades. They had reframed their act as a necessary revolution against an unjust authority, gradually building a narrative that positioned Harrison as a villain whose removal had ultimately benefited the community through their more compassionate management of his resources. This is a common psychological pattern among those who have committed serious crimes, explained Dr. Mitchell. They create a narrative that allows them to maintain a positive self-image despite their actions. In this case, the women came to see themselves as reluctant liberators who had been forced to take extreme measures against a tyrant and who had proven their moral superiority through their subsequent good works. This narrative was reinforced by their genuine improvements to the community. Under their management, working conditions at Blackwood Enterprises improved significantly. They established medical care for employees, supported education for workers' children, and instituted policies protecting female staff from harassment decades before such protections were legally required. The prosperity they brought to Elmwood during challenging economic times further validated their belief that the end had justified the means. They created a community around themselves that reinforced their sense of righteousness, Dr. Mitchell noted. They were surrounded by people who benefited from their generosity and who viewed them as benevolent figures. This social affirmation helped silence whatever doubts might have lingered. Yet the letters revealed that their consciences were never completely quieted. As they aged, references to nightmares and anxiety increased. Vivian, in particular, seemed to struggle with what they had done, writing to Catherine in 1957, "I still see his face in dreams, see, not angry as he often was in life, but confused as he looked in that final moment when he realized what was happening. Sometimes I wonder if we might have found another way. But then I remember the girls at the mill who now have safe working conditions, the children attending the school we built, the families who kept their homes during the crash because of our policies. Would any of that have happened under his management? I tell myself no, but still he comes in the night." The investigation also revealed the careful system of checks and balances the women had established among themselves to maintain their security. Each had taken responsibility for different aspects of the deception. Catherine handled all correspondence in Harrison's name and managed business relationships where his continued existence needed to be established. Eleanor maintained their financial security, creating complex accounting systems that obscured the transfer of assets. Vivian managed the household and local community relationships, ensuring no staff or visitors came close to the concealed remains. They created a three-way partnership where each was essential to maintaining the secret, explained Sheriff Davis. This interdependence ensured that no one could betray the others without implicating herself. It was a remarkably sophisticated approach to maintaining a conspiracy over decades. This system extended to the legal arrangements they made regarding the estate. Each woman held different portions of the property and business interests, structured so that no one could sell or transfer major assets without the agreement of all three. Their wills were carefully constructed to activate only upon the death of all three women, preventing any deathbed confessions or posthumous revelations from a single member of the group. The legal architecture they created was extraordinary for women with no formal legal training in that era, noted Milton Hargrove IV, great-grandson of Harrison's original lawyer and now a partner in the same firm. They clearly studied property law extensively and received advice from someone with significant expertise. The structures they created would be considered sophisticated even by today's standards of estate planning. The source of this legal knowledge appeared to be Catherine, whose interrupted education had been in the field of business. The letters revealed that she had continued her studies privately throughout her life, maintaining correspondence courses with northern universities under an assumed name and building an extensive library on business and property law. "They were determined never to be vulnerable again," observed Dr. Morgan. Catherine's ongoing education, conducted in secret for years, reflects their understanding that knowledge was power in a world where women had limited formal authority. They equipped themselves with every tool necessary to protect what they had taken. This determination extended to their careful cultivation of political and social connections. The letters documented their systematic efforts to establish relationships with local and state officials, judges, bank presidents, and newspaper editors. These connections, built through strategic philanthropy and social engagements, created a protective network around them that would have made any accusations against them difficult to pursue, even if suspicions had arisen. They understood that their safety depended not just on concealing the crime, but on becoming too respected and connected to be credible targets of suspicion, Dr. Morgan explained. By the 1930s, they had positioned themselves so securely within the social and economic fabric of the region that questioning their narrative would have been unthinkable. This security allowed them to gradually relax some of their initial precautions. By the 1940s, they began to travel more frequently, though never all three at once. They cautiously expanded their social circle, hosting events at Oakwood Manor that had once been strictly off-limits to visitors. They even commissioned a portrait of themselves for the town hall in 1952, symbolically cementing their status as community matriarchs rather than servants who had risen above their station through criminal means. There's a photograph from the portrait unveiling ceremony that perfectly captures the culmination of their transformation, Dr. Mercer noted. They're surrounded by the town's elite, politicians, businessmen, clergy, all raising glasses in their honor. Eleanor's journal entry from that evening reads simply, "It is done. We are finally safe." The three women who had once polished the silver for such gatherings were now the guests of honor, their former status completely erased from public memory. Yet even as they achieved this ultimate security, the letters suggest their relationships with each other were evolving in complex ways. The intense bond forged through shared crime and necessary mutual dependence began to show strains as the decades passed. Catherine's ambition sometimes clashed with Eleanor's caution. Vivian's increasing religious devotion in later years created tension with the more pragmatic Catherine. These were three very different women who had been bound together by extraordinary circumstances, Dr. Mitchell observed. As the immediate danger of discovery receded, their natural differences emerged more strongly. The letters reveal periods of significant conflict, particularly in the 1950s, as they aged and began to consider their legacies. A particularly revealing exchange occurred after Catherine proposed expanding their business interests into neighboring counties in 1954. Eleanor strongly opposed the move, writing, "Have we not taken enough? Have we not built enough? I cannot face my Maker having grabbed still more beyond what we already seized through blood. Let us be content with what we have and focus on making amends through our giving. I cannot bear the weight of further ambition." These philosophical differences extended to their views on what should happen to Oakwood Manor after their deaths. Vivian advocated for transforming it into a religious retreat center. Catherine wanted it preserved as a historic home, celebrating their business achievements. Eleanor, increasingly troubled by guilt, suggested selling it and using the proceeds exclusively for charitable purposes, effectively erasing their presence from it. The compromise they eventually reached, establishing it as a museum focused on local history rather than themselves specifically, reflects the ongoing negotiation of their complex legacy, explained Diane Patterson. They wanted to be remembered, but they also understood the danger of inviting too much scrutiny into their personal history. Their final years brought increasing health challenges that tested the boundaries of their compact. When Catherine suffered a stroke in 1960, temporarily losing her ability to speak clearly, Eleanor and Vivian moved her to a private wing of the house and restricted all visitors, fearing what she might inadvertently reveal during her recovery. The letters between Vivian and Eleanor during this period reveal acute anxiety about maintaining their secret as they aged and became more vulnerable. "We must consider what arrangements should be made should one of us become mentally compromised," Eleanor wrote to Vivian in 1961. "The burden of our shared past must not slip through failing memories or loosened tongues. Perhaps we should discuss with Dr. Lewis the possibility of private care at home rather than any institutional setting, regardless of cost." Catherine's death in 1962 marked the beginning of the end of their conspiracy. The letters between the surviving two women reflect both grief for their lost companion and fear that their protective triangle had been broken. They became increasingly reclusive, reducing their public engagements and limiting household staff to a few trusted individuals. When Eleanor died 2 years later, Vivian was left alone with the secret that had defined nearly half a century of her life. Her letters to her deceased friends, found hidden in a prayer book beside her bed after her death, reveal a woman haunted by both grief and guilt, seeking spiritual reconciliation for their shared crime. "I speak to the minister weekly now," she wrote in what appears to be one of her final letters. "Though I cannot tell him what truly troubles my soul, he offers general absolution for unspecified sins, but I wonder if forgiveness is possible for what we did." Yet I cannot bring myself to expose our deed even now, to destroy the good we've built upon that terrible foundation. Would revealing the truth serve any purpose except to tarnish all we've accomplished? I will take our secret to my grave, as we agreed all those years ago, but I pray nightly that all three of us may somehow find peace beyond this life. Vivian's death in 1968 completed their pact of silence. The secret of Harrison Blackwood's murder remained entombed within the walls of Oakwood Manor for another 55 years, until modern renovation work finally exposed what three determined women had hidden for over a century. This case ultimately raises profound questions about justice, legacy, and how we evaluate historical actions in context, reflected Sheriff Davis. These women committed murder and sustained a lifetime of deception. Yet they also created significant positive change in their community, improving lives and establishing institutions that continue to benefit people today. How do we reconcile these contradictory truths? For the community of Elmwood, the revelations created a complex reckoning with local history. Institutions named for the three women debated whether to change their designations. The substantial trust funds established by their estate continued to provide scholarships and community support, creating ethical dilemmas about whether to continue accepting this tainted wealth. We ultimately decided to maintain the scholarship programs, but to include education about the complete history as part of the program, explained Dr. James Williams, Superintendent of Elmwood Schools. Students who receive these scholarships now learn about both the positive contributions these women made and the criminal acts that made those contributions possible. It becomes a complex lesson in ethics, history, and the ambiguities of human nature. At Oakwood Manor itself, the museum underwent a complete transformation. The discovery of Harrison's remains and the subsequent investigation revealed architectural modifications throughout the house that had been designed to conceal evidence and create the illusion that he had simply departed. False walls, hidden storage areas, and disguised passages testified to the elaborate physical infrastructure the women had created to support their deception. "We've preserved these modifications as part of the historical record," explained Diane Patterson. "Visitors can now see the architectural evidence of the conspiracy, the sealed wall cavity where Harrison was concealed, the hidden document storage areas, the disguised entrance to the service road they used to return his car to the property. It's a physical manifestation of how thoroughly they had planned their crime and subsequent cover-up." The museum also expanded its archive to include the extensive documentation uncovered during the investigation, the journals, letters, legal documents, and financial records that told the full story of what had occurred at Oakwood Manor. These materials attracted scholars from across the country, leading to new academic studies on female criminality, class mobility, and the hidden power structures of the early 20th century South. What makes this case so fascinating from a historical perspective is how it challenges our assumptions about women's agency in that era, noted Dr. Morgan. These women didn't simply accept their limited circumstances, they took dramatic, illegal action to change them. Their story reveals a level of ambition, calculation, and determination rarely documented in women of their social position and time period. The case also prompted a broader archaeological investigation of the estate grounds. Ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed no additional human remains, alleviating concerns that Harrison might not have been their only victim. However, excavations did uncover evidence of items the women had disposed of as part of their cover-up. Fragments of Harrison's distinctive pocket watch in the old well, remnants of burned clothing in what had been an incinerator area, and pieces of his dismantled automobile buried in the far corner of the property. They were methodical in eliminating anything that might connect them to Harrison's disappearance, noted forensic archaeologist Dr. Maria Sanchez. The physical evidence corroborates the written accounts in Eleanor's journal. They didn't just conceal the body, they systematically erased every trace of Harrison's final day. Perhaps most poignant were the personal items of Harrison's that the women had chosen to preserve rather than destroy. In a locked chest found in the attic, investigators discovered his collection of cufflinks, his family Bible, photographs of his parents, and the pocket watch his father had carried during the Civil War. These items, carefully stored rather than disposed of, suggested a complex relationship with their victim and the history they had appropriated. They couldn't bring themselves to eliminate all traces of him, observed Dr. Mitchell. These preserved items represent a kind of ambivalence. They had killed the man, but felt some obligation to maintain connections to the legacy they had stolen. It's a psychological contradiction that appears repeatedly in their writings. The need to justify their actions while still acknowledging at some level the wrongness of what they had done. As the investigation concluded and Harrison Blackwood's remains were finally laid to rest in the family plot at Elmwood Cemetery, the community grappled with a story that defied simple moral categorization. The three women had committed a premeditated murder and sustained a lifetime of deception. They had stolen a man's property and identity, yet they had also transformed that stolen wealth into genuine community benefits, improved the lives of countless workers and families, and created lasting institutions that continued to serve the public good. In many ways, this is a story without heroes, reflected Reverend Michael Thomas at a community forum held to discuss the case. We see human beings driven to terrible acts by desperate circumstances, then spending the rest of their lives trying to justify those acts through good works. We see privilege and exploitation creating the conditions for violence. We see how wealth can obscure truth and rewrite history. There are lessons here about justice, redemption, and the complex legacies we leave behind. For the current residents of Elmwood, the case prompted reflection on how communities remember their past and whom they choose to honor. The town square, once dominated by a bronze statue of the three women commemorating their philanthropic contributions, now features a more nuanced memorial acknowledging both their positive impact and the criminal foundation of their wealth and status. "We chose not to erase them from our history," explained Mayor Robert Johnson. "That would simply be replacing one incomplete narrative with another. Instead, we're committed to telling the full, complicated truth about them, about Harrison, about the social systems that created the conditions for this tragedy. It's uncomfortable, but it's honest." Harrison's distant relatives, located through genealogical research, expressed mixed emotions about the discoveries. His great-grandnephew, Thomas Blackwood, traveled from Virginia to attend the reinterment ceremony. "It's strange to mourn someone none of us ever knew, who died long before any of us were born," he reflected. The family stories about Uncle Harrison portrayed him as an adventurous businessman who abandoned the South for new opportunities. Learning the truth is shocking, but also gives a kind of closure to a family mystery. The historical record suggests he was not an easy man, though that certainly doesn't justify what happened to him. The Blackwood family ultimately declined to pursue legal claims against the estates of the three women, acknowledging the complexity of addressing century-old crimes and recognizing the positive impact their philanthropic legacy had created. "What would be served by trying to reclaim assets after all this time?" Thomas questioned. "The wealth has largely been distributed to community institutions. The women who committed the crime have been dead for decades. Sometimes justice in the conventional sense isn't possible, and we have to find peace in simply knowing the truth." As the case receded from headlines and became integrated into local historical understanding, Oakwood Manor itself seemed to take on a different atmosphere. Tour guides reported visitors experiencing unexplained cold spots near the wall where Harrison had been concealed, hearing footsteps in empty corridors and occasionally glimpsing the figure of a man in period clothing reflected in the manor's many mirrors. "I don't put much stock in ghost stories," Diane Patterson stated when asked about these reports, "but this house has certainly contained its share of secrets and suffering. If any place might retain echoes of its past, perhaps it would be Oakwood. Whether these phenomena represented supernatural manifestations or simply the power of suggestion on visitors now aware of the house's dark history, they became part of the evolving